Yeah, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Pleased to be here. As mentioned by Mortz, I would like to give a brief background of what's been happening in Sudan currently. The current war, which started in the 15th of April. However, I think there is some important historical background because, as he mentioned, the war didn't just erupt out of nowhere. There were historical incidences that led to the events that we're witnessing now in Sudan. As some of you might know, Sudan is currently suffering from one of the most difficult humanitarian crises in the world. Over 7 million people were internally displaced, with many atrocities committed across the country in different parts and so on. However, I would like to take us back to the year 2003, which is the year notoriously known for the beginning of the Darfur genocide. In 2003, so many atrocities were committed in different parts in the Darfur region, and ironically, the parties that took part back then in 2003 are the same parties that are waging the war in the country now. After the genocide in 2003, there were multiple and a series of peace agreements for the region, namely the Abuja Agreement, the Doha Agreement, and many others. However, another important historical incident that I would like to bring to attention is the 2008 indictment of the ICC, the International Criminal Court, of a sitting president for the first time, which was the indictment of the Bashir regime against the war crimes that have been committed in Darfur, among other people in the Sudanese government at the time. I think this is particularly important because even though there were many attempts to sign peace agreements, there was no realization of justice at the time for the people of Darfur or people that have suffered from this war. Fast forward 2018, a very massive revolution takes over the regime at the time, and the way this happened is by the top leadership of the army deciding to remove Bashir from the leadership, and then starting what we call the transitional period, which was a partnership between a civilian arm and the military arm of the government. Notably, this army top leadership is the same people that were part in the different incidences in Darfur before, especially the Rapid Support Forces, formerly known as the Janjaweed, which was rebranded through the latest years of Bashir. In the transitional period, also, there was another attempt to do a peace agreement for the region and across Sudan, which is the Juba Peace Agreement. And this particular agreement was a bit flawed in a sense that it tried to bring everything in the same document. There was an Eastern track, there was a Darfur track, there was another other regional tracks. So it tried to solve what we call an overburdened peace agreement. It tried to solve so many issues with just a silver bullet, and it rather exacerbated the issues of lack of justice, lack of transitional justice, by not tackling the root causes of what's happening. People argue that it even paves the way for the current war because the grievances were still ongoing, while certain groups of people have hijacked the process by claiming to be representing different communities across the country, and they don't necessarily have that representation. Fast forward to April 15th, 2023. The war starts in Khartoum, different parts between the Sudanese armed forces and the Rapid Support Forces, and it still continues to unravel in different parts of the country. Of course, so many atrocities, just like many wars, are taking place. A massive security vacuum is across the country, and civilians are literally caught in the crossfire between the two parties. However, there were again attempts to at least reach a ceasefire, which haven't succeeded so far, almost 8 months after the break of the fight. So far, I don't see any hard-line mentions of justice, specifically in the ongoing war. However, I think it's important to at least learn from the lessons of the past, specifically in the recent Sudan history, on whether justice should be an issue as we're discussing peace agreements, rather than lip singing, as you said, but rather a serious issue that people can actually talk about and include in the ongoing negotiations, be it in Jeddah, be it the attempts by the IGAD initiative or African Union initiatives and so on. I think the indictment of Bashir in 2008 and what's happening now only exposes the short attention span for the international community. At the time, this was a very big case. A president sitting in power, being indicted, the amount of attention that it received globally, the media coverage and everything, and then over the years, it died out. Even in Sudan, I don't think Sudanese citizens at the moment are able to locate where the former president is. So I think that tells a lot. And the issue with this is that it sets a precedent for the current warring parties that they can get away with it. It doesn't set a good example in terms of justice, accountability, and so on. People would know that no matter how bad it gets, it might as well also get away with their crimes and so on. And it's rather confusing for the Sudanese citizens, because from one end there was all this international attention on a particular issue. Suddenly there is this complete inertia. At a time where we see atrocities being committed around the country, we see civilians' homes being occupied, we actually see women being sold and bought in markets in areas controlled by the rapid support forces. So it's rather confusing for the people. However, I think there are different things that people can consider at the current war that might help in terms of justice and accountability in the future or the near future. For instance, the issue of documentation and amplifying voices of people in Sudan. Even though there are different events happening in different parts of the country, naturally the capital gets more coverage, unlike other places that don't have the same coverage of internet or means of communication. There are a few voices coming out of that, and I think there should be more emphasis on this. Even though we're not talking about justice conditions at the moment, it's important to make sure all these things are documented. Another important element, I think, is also getting a justice framework that fits the Sudanese condition, that addresses the history of violence and conflict that have been happening in Sudan, not just a short-term kind of solution that only deals with the two warring generals in the country now. Such a framework should borrow from local mechanisms in Sudan that have a historical legacy. It should also borrow from regional legacies in the region with support from neighboring countries. And it, of course, should be based on the other international laws with mechanisms to make sure that this time around it at least be implemented. And it's also worth mentioning that over the past few years, there's been a growing civil society in Sudan, which has been gaining strength, and it's also crucial to include the civil society in terms of conversations of justice, accountability, and so on. Additionally, I think it's also, you briefly mentioned the proxy war. I think even though we say that there is a short attention span when it comes to the atrocities in Sudan, there is still a heavy regional influence taking place in the country. We see infinitive supply of resources flowing into the country for one of the warring parties. We see so much backdoor kind of diplomacy happening, supporting one side over the other and these kind of things. So I think it's also important to, even at the regional and the international level, to analyze which regional actors are affecting which side and how can we put them accountable also for this kind of influence.